Welcome to Daily Wisdom, where every single day we seek to take a piece of God's wisdom and apply it to our everyday life. Now, we are following along with a reading plan called The Essential Jesus, where we are discovering lots of great detail about Jesus' life in these short little Bible studies we do each morning. You can find that in the Bible app under the Reading Plans tab. And if you are interested in that and following along with us, you can find information in the links below this description here on YouTube. So let's jump into our reading. Today we are in Exodus, and we're learning about Jesus and a reference to Jesus where he is called a lamb. He is compared to a lamb. And you may have heard the term Lamb of God in reference to Jesus before. Today we're discovering why that reference to Jesus is important and how he got that nickname. So we're jumping into Exodus today. God is telling Moses here to make sure that each family picks up a lamb for a sacrifice. Let's look. Exodus chapter 12, verse 3. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a lamb, they must share one with the nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. You are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males, without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. So God instructs the Israelites to each select a lamb and sacrifice it, and to cook it a certain way. In the verses that follow, I'd encourage you to read all the way to verse 30 so you can get the detail here, because the details are important and there is a lot of great information in there. What we see following these verses is that they're instructed to cook the lamb a certain way, to make sure that they take the blood of the lamb and paint it on the door frames of the household. And there's a purpose for all this instruction. The people of Israel are actually told to sleep with their shoes on because they must be ready to depart, indicating that they will eventually gain their freedom. And they gain that freedom through this miracle that God's about to perform. And it's a scary miracle that God performs here in order to rescue his people. Scary to imagine, because what happens next is that blood from the lamb protected the families from God's wrath. What happened next is that God's Spirit and the angel of death came upon that city and passed over the houses with the door frames that were painted with blood. That is where we get the Jewish celebration of the Passover. They were passed over, but the houses that weren't passed over, there were dire consequences. They lost their firstborn child. So when people woke up the next morning, they awoke to screams throughout the city as people were horrified by what they saw at the death of their firstborn. But what we see here is this description of the lamb. And this is why Jesus is called the Lamb of God. He's called a lamb, and that reference in multiple places in the New Testament. Let me give you a few examples. The first reference to the lamb is John the Baptist called Jesus the Lamb of God. Later, Peter, one of the apostles, he refers to Jesus as the Lamb without blemish. And then even John, who wrote the Revelation, he refers to Jesus as the Lamb who was slain. Not only is there this connection to Jesus being referenced as a lamb, because he is the final sacrifice. The reason Jesus is the Lamb of God is there is no more need for the sacrifice of animals. There's no more need for us to live in fear, separated from God, because Jesus was the final lamb. And there's also a connection to Jesus through the blood. His blood is where we receive our forgiveness, we're told. And that God reserves his judgment because his blood was shed on my behalf and your behalf. And that is good for us to remember as we start our week. Let's start our week this week remembering the sacrifice that Jesus made for each of us, so that God reserves his judgment and he passes his judgment over because he sees us in a pure way because of the sacrifice that Jesus made. I think that's a great way for us to start our week. Remembering that so that when we make decisions this week, we keep in mind how much Jesus sacrificed for us, so that perhaps in some way this week you are willing to sacrifice for him. That's today's Daily Wisdom. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If so, hit that thumbs up button. That'll help others to see it. And also, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please consider doing so. You'll be notified every single time we upload a new video. We'll see you tomorrow.